Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis, I'm from Autodesk, and today's topic I'm going to be talking about lining parts together without using joints. And so we're actually going to create kind of like this enclosure you see on the screen. Now, good news, I have my buddy and friend Aaron is back officially. He's been gone for about 6 weeks, so Aaron is on the keyboard today. So everybody make sure you say hi to him. We've missed him. He was actually on sabbatical for about 6 weeks and moved to Toronto, Canada. So we're going to miss him in San Francisco, but he's making a new home in Toronto. So everybody say hi to Aaron on the keyboard. So Aaron, again, thank you for helping out. Okay. So, yeah, I can see in the chat everybody's excited. Yeah, we've missed them, I'll be honest. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is positioning parts in place without having to create a ton of joints. In fact, I'm going to kind of zoom up on this corner here, and you'll see we're going to learn about bringing in some 80-20 extrusions, some mounting plates. You'll notice I even have some screws in here with their specialty T-nuts that they use that slide in there. And believe it or not, there's not a single joint in this assembly, and you'll see that as we go through. So I'm going to go ahead and start a new design. And you might ask, like, why not use joints? Well, when we're mocking something together like this, I don't want to have to worry about specifying all those positions and capturing positions, etc., etc. I just kind of want to mock up the design, and then, this is a rigid structure, so there's no movement going on. So I really don't need all of the different joint types, like revolute and the slider, etc. So we're going to learn a new command under the Modify menu, called align, and I'm going to show the functionality of this. We're also going to learn a couple other tricks, and a shout out to Peter. He made a funny comment out on the Fusion 360 webpage saying, I love learning all these new tricks, so I appreciate that. I'm glad everybody's learning something. I've shown this in the past where you can insert a McMaster car component. But there's also another real powerful option in here called Insert a Manufacturer Part. And when I do this, it's going to bring up a web page, of course, on the wrong screen. So let me bring this guy over. Oops. Make sure that's working okay. Just a second here. Okay. And I want to get back so I can see what everybody's seeing. Okay. So this is bringing in a manufacturer part, and you'll notice that it's got a bunch of different products in here, or different manufacturers, I should say. So for example, at the very top, we've got 80-20. You'll see ABB in here, and you'll notice some of these, you'll probably recognize some of these, such as, for example, Bimbus cylinders. I think there's a lot of electronic parts in here, like Eaton has a bunch of stuff in here. Maybe you need like IGUS chains, so you can click on the I over here, and here is all of the different IGUS products. And so I'm going to show how you can insert this type of stuff right into Fusion. So I'll go ahead and click on the home. And we're going to be using this 80-20. So I'm going to click on 80-20, and it's organized. So for example, inch metric, the Holly tube, quick frame, etc. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on these and kind of like dig my way down. You can see we can have like profiles, fastening options, joining plates, panels and doors. Floor to frame, for example, if it has to wheel around or whatever. So what's cool about this is we don't have to draw any of it. We don't have to design any of it. And these are the actual products. So for example, I'm going to start with this 10 series, and you can see all of the different types of extrusions that they have. And these are the ones that 80/20 manufacturers. So for example, let's go ahead and click on this 1010. And it gives you options, and it even brings up a 3D viewer. In fact, if I kind of rotate it, I'm gonna have to zoom up here so you can kind of see the end profile. This is a really long example, so that's why it looks so long, but you can see that sure enough, that's a 3D model of that 80/20 extrusion. So you can verify that it's correct. It gives us all the information about it, and then you'll notice right here it says stock length, which is 97. Well, I can come in here and say, I want to do a custom length. And I can either drag or I could type it in. So for example, I'm going to come in here and do a custom length. Let's just do a custom length of, of 24. Okay. Now you'll notice it says, okay, you've changed something. If you want to update your preview, you can, and it'll update that 3D preview, but you'll notice it'll be much shorter, a better representation of the actual part. So I really like this built-in 3D preview, so I can verify that, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay. Then you'll notice right here, to Autodesk Fusion 360. So I just click on that button right there, and it's going to bring up this little dialog that says open this application. So go ahead and say open. And let's confirm that that's going to work. So it's because I have these multiple screens. Yeah, there it goes. I'm going to have to bring up Fusion. And here you can see there is that 3D model from 80/20. Now it's pointing up and down. I want it to lay horizontal, so I'm just going to grab this little button right there and kind of drag that down until I see 90 degrees. And so now it's kind of laying flat in the, the top orientation, which is what I want. And I'll say okay. Okay, so that's how simple it is. I did not have to draw the profile and extrude or anything like that. And this is just like any other Fusion file. So for example, I could click on this face, say press pull, and I could move, and change the length of this part if I needed to. So by default, I brought in a 24-inch part, but I could come in and make changes to it, just like it was created inside of Fusion. Okay, so I'm going to do this a couple times to bring in some other parts. So let me jump back to that page right here. And now I want a custom length. Let's just do a custom length of 16 in this case. I'll say to Autodesk Fusion 360. Click on that open launcher, and I'll just jump over to Fusion, and you'll see it come into Fusion and add it into our current design. So there it is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate this a little bit, and I'm going to rotate it this direction. And maybe I'm just going to kind of sort of get it close to where it needs to go. Okay. So you can kind of see it's sort of floating in space right now. And I'm going to leave it where it is. I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. And notice my browser. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. So here's the two different parts. There's the 24-inch part, and there's the 16-inch part. In fact, I'm going to move the 24-inch part over just a little bit so it's not in the default location, because that's going to make things a little bit more observable in the near future. Otherwise, things would come in perfectly, and I want to show that it doesn't come in perfectly every single time, and we might need to, reposition or whatever. Okay, so I've got my two parts. Now, I want to line these up. And you might say, okay, we'll go ahead and use the joint command. So I'm going to say joint. Now, when you do a joint command, you get all these little markers and stuff to line things up. Well, for example, I don't have a sharp corner right here, so I really can't go corner to corner. In fact, if I zoom out, you'll see over here, there's not a corner to go to. And so creating a joint isn't always the best solution. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use the align command. So I'm going to click on align, and you'll notice it allows us to align components from and to. So what I like to do is I kind of like to get it lined up in 3 different axes. So for example, I'm just going to click on this face. I could click on these little markers. It really doesn't matter. But I'm just going to click on that face because I want to align that face with a face over here. So for example, this face, I want it to butt up against this face. So watch what happens when I click. You'll see that part slide over. And if we look at it from the side, or from the front, you'll notice that those are now lined up. So it aligned that face with this face down here. Now I'm still in my align command, and this is what I think is so cool. I don't have to do 3 separate align commands. I'm just still in the align command. Maybe I'll say I want that face to align with this face right here, and you'll see it snap down. So sure enough, if we look at it from the front, we can see that we're aligned against that face and we're aligned against the top. And so really the last thing we need to do is say, okay, let's align that face with this face over here. And you can see how it slides that part into the correct location. And I'll go ahead and say okay. And there it is. And now you can really visually see that sure enough we weren't able to line up any corners or anything like that with a joint command. It would have been pretty difficult. I mean, it's doable, but I really like the align command. I think it's so much faster. Okay. Okay, so now I got these 2 parts where they need to be, but I want to join them together. So let's go back out to that page. And I'm just going to back up a couple steps. And I'm going to go into the joining plates. So I'll click on joining plates. And you can see all of the different manufacturer joining plates. And I can't emphasize how cool this page is. I mean, I use McMaster-Carr all the time, but this is so powerful with all of the different manufacturers out there. Okay, so it looks like this guy right here. I'll use this one. Okay. Gives me, again, some options, tells me what the dimensions are, gives me a preview what that's going to look like in my browser here and all that kind of stuff. Looks good. Even tells me what other people that were interested in, was interested in this part. It's kind of cool. I'll say to Autodesk Fusion 360. Again, I could have sketched this, I could have drawn it, but that would have taken quite some time. So why not just bring in the manufacturer's part? Now it's pointing the wrong direction, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate. Let's just go 90 degrees that way. And I like to get it fairly close. So I usually look down at the top view, kind of position it where it sort of needs to be, and then I'll kind of zoom or rotate, kind of to the front view and just bring it down. Oops, a little bit too far. Something like that. I'll go ahead and say okay. And now it's kind of floating out in space, but it's fairly close where it needs to go. Okay, so let's use the align command. So I'll say align from. So I like to get it where it needs to go first. So let's just say maybe that face is going to sit on that face there. You see it kind of slide down a little bit. Then I could say that face and that face there, and you see it slide toward me. And then finally, that face and this face over here. And it slides into place. Notice I'm not having to grab any of these, oops, wrong button. Any of these, tick marks or anything like that. I'm just basically grabbing, faces. I'm saying align that face there with this face here, for example. It's very, very quick. I'll say okay. and it's now in the correct position. Hopefully this is making sense. It looks like Aaron is actively answering questions. So, okay, now let's bring in some hardware. Again, don't need to draw it. Let's just go out here. I'll back up a couple steps and say fastening options. Sometimes you can do a search, and I think it's 3042. Let me just do a quick search for that. Is from my notes when I was doing this earlier. So if you know, like, you can see all the different product numbers, and sure enough, there's 3042. It's this socket head cap screw. I'm sorry, not a socket head cap screw, but just kind of a button head cap screw, it looks like. So I can rotate it around, see what that looks like. I can specify the different threads in here if I need to. It's really cool, the different lengths. I'm just going to use the default one and say to Fusion 360. It'll switch over to Fusion. Okay, and again, I like to get it sort of close, so I go from the top. I'll just kind of drag that over. Bring this down a little bit. And the only reason I do that is because I can kind of zoom up on this area and see that, oh, sure enough, the screw is pointing in the wrong direction. So I like to kind of get it oriented first. So I'll say 90 degrees. Now I could use the align command, but you'll notice I'm in this move command right now. It's allowing me to move it around. And by default, it's allowing me to do a free move where I can just kind of move it around. But there's one in here called point to point. So I'm going to say point to point, and let's just look at the bottom of the head here, and you can see I can grab this edge, and it's a little hard to see, but there's a point right in the middle, right there. So if I just click on this edge, it's going to grab that point. Oops. That's my origin point. And then the same thing over here. I'm just going to kind of get near this circle and click, and it's going to move that screw from where it was to that new location. And because I picked, let me go ahead and say okay, because I picked, you know, this bottom edge of the screw head, it lined it up with the surface of the plate, and it's perfectly lined up in the circle. So it's kind of like a free move that we got. Didn't cost us anything. Okay. Now, I think I see some people asking questions about, is align just like doing joints and stuff? No. In fact, if I grab this plate or this screw, I can move them out of location. There is no constraints or joints or anything like that being created as we're doing this. That's an excellent question. Oops. Let me undo back. So it's just basically getting them in the correct location, but there is nothing defining that these are, you know, constrained or jointed together. But we're going to get to that here in just a moment. We're going to learn some tips and tricks with that also. Okay, so we can kind of see that sure enough that's coming down through, and maybe I want to create a drawing of this or an exploded view later, so I want to actually show how this thing is going to get assembled. So I'm going to bring in one of their special T-nuts, I guess they're called. So let me back up a little bit, and I'll go to the fastener. Let's do this guy, and you'll see the different kinds that they have. So it basically looks like a special nut that can slide through. Now I do know that the thread that I brought in was a 1032nd, so I'm going to come in here and change this to 1032nd, and it'll update, give me the correct part number, etc. I'll say that's good. Let's go to Fusion. Okay. Thanks, Ron. I just glanced over at the chat. I appreciate that. Shout out to Ron Owensby. So, okay, I'm going to slide this over, bring this down. Okay. Again, getting it sort of close so I can kind of zoom up and see what's going on here. Well, I know I kind of need to rotate it. Let's just go 90 degrees in that direction. And once again, I'll use the, actually I won't use the point to point because we're going to see an issue that we're going to run into here if I were to use point to point. So in fact, I'll show you. I'll make a mistake here. So I'll say point to point. I'll grab that top edge. But then I need to select a circular edge here. And if I were to grab that edge there, you're going to see that it's going to sink my washer into our extrusion, which obviously we don't want to do. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it right where it is. And we'll use the align command to help us out. Because remember, with the align command, I can do multiple aligns. So let's do align. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to select that top edge right there. And I'll select that top edge right there. And you can see that it aligned it where it needed to go. But let's go ahead and turn off that plate. Now I'm going to align that face with this face, and you'll see it drop down. And we're perfectly lined up axially through the center of the screw, and now it's touching the extrusion where it needs to be. So I'll go ahead and say OK. So again, you can see that's why I really like this align command. Okay, well, what about these other holes? Well, let's let Fusion do the hard work. Okay, I'm going to create a pattern. Now, I could do a pattern on a path, but in this case, I'm actually going to do a rectangular pattern because it's kind of a rectangular part. So I'm going to say rectangular pattern. Now, every once in a while, you'll get these warnings that say, hey, some components have been moved. Do you want to capture the current position, or do you want to continue in the previous? Well, I kind of like where it is right now, so I'm going to say capture the current position. And so it's going to tag in my timeline, okay, that screw and that washer were positioned where they need to be. Okay, so now I'm in my pattern command. What are the objects? And I want to make sure I'm patterning, if it comes up default faces, I don't want that. I want to pattern components because everything that we're doing right now are components. Okay, so now I can say I want to pattern the screw and the nut at the same time. Okay, what's the direction? Well, let's just go ahead and click a linear direction. And when I start to drag, we can kind of see a preview, and I'll move even further so you can kind of see what's going on there. Okay. We have a distance of spacing or extent. Well, I know that the spacing of these holes is 1 inch, and that's just because I've done this before, but I could have measured between those holes, but to save time, it's 1 inch. And sure enough, you can see it positioned those where they need to be. Well, I also want to pattern in this direction, but notice I'm getting way too many, but that's okay. We'll fix that here in just a moment. So I know that this distance for the spacing is 1 inch also. And then notice this little suppress checkbox. What that means is every single one of these instances has a little checkbox, and I can just click on them and turn off the instances that I don't need. So I'm going to just click those 4 that I don't need, and I'll say OK, and I've just created a rectangular pattern. We can see, it did the screws and the nuts. However, if we look over here, we can see that the nut is pointing in the wrong direction. So we need to rotate that around. Okay, easy fix. Now here's a neat little tip. If you just hover over something in your timeline, you can see how it highlights it in your browser. So I can see that 3276 and 3276, those are the 2 nuts that I need to rotate. So I'm going to just click on it and say move. And my origin is right in the center of that, so I don't even have to do anything except grab this guy and rotate it 90 degrees. And boom, we're done with that guy. And then the same thing with this one. Right click, say move, and we'll rotate. Oops, make sure I grab the right thing there. Sorry, I'll do that again. I'll right click and say move and rotate 90 degrees and say OK. And if I were to do a section analysis now and slice through this, we can verify that the nuts are pointing in the correct direction. And everything's centered and everything looks really, really cool. Okay, now that was with me talking. Think about how fast we've created, basically this corner of our enclosure here. We've got the mounting plate, we've got the screws, we've got the nuts in location and everything. Now, obviously I want to reuse this whole assembly, but I don't have it as an assembly right now. These are all individual components in my timeline. So what I'm going to do now is I want to start organizing. So I'm going to create a new component, and I think the easiest way to do that is right click at the top level, and you can see it says new component. And that's exactly the same as if I were to come up to my assemble menu and say new component. But I'm going to say new component, and you'll see, sure enough, there it is. And I can rename it, and I highly recommend you rename your parts and your components because it makes things easier to find and deal with later. So I want to kind of create a sub-assembly of this corner plate. So I'm going to just call this corner plate assembly, just something like that. Okay. And then I'm just going to grab all of the parts that have to do with this corner plate assembly. So there's the big blue part there and all of the screws and nuts. So I'm just going to highlight all of those and drag and drop it onto my corner plate assembly. So I'm dropping it there. Now, like I said, you might see this pop up. I'm going to go ahead and capture the position, but notice what happened. It put all of those components underneath this corner plate assembly. And if I were to toggle the visibility on or off, we can see that that's almost like a sub-assembly. It makes it really easy to kind of figure things out. Okay. Okay, let me go ahead and activate my top level again. Now I want to start mirroring some things around since I don't want to have to keep reinserting. I already got what I want. So I want to mirror this onto the other side over here. Well, to do a mirror, we need to have a plane or an edge or something that we can mirror along. And I don't have that here. So I'm going to create a construction plane. And one of my favorites is this mid-plane construction plane. So I'll go ahead and select that. And I'll come over here and grab that face there. Then I'll come over here, and depending on where you move, you can kind of see how it's highlighting that face. I'm going to go ahead and click that face there. And what it did is it basically sliced it in half, and it put this plane exactly in the middle of those two faces. Okay. And I'll do the exact same thing because I'm probably going to mirror in the length direction also. So I'll do a mid plane. And let's just grab this end face like so. And I'll kind of rotate so we can kind of see. And I'll grab that face there. And I now have a construction plane that slices right through the center of that long arm. Okay, I hope this is all making sense. Okay, so now that I have what I want with these construction planes, let's start using the mirror command. So I'll come in here and say create mirror. again, I want to make sure that components is selected. Sometimes by default, faces is selected. So just kind of verify that we want to mirror some components. And I want to select the, let's do the corner plate and this arm right here. What's my mirror plane? It's going to be this plane right here. And you can see how that brings that across. I'll go ahead and say OK. That was fast. And again, everything is where it needs to be. We haven't done any joints or anything like that. Let's do that again. Let's go ahead and say mirror. Components. I'll do the 2 corner plate assemblies now. And then this 16-inch piece. What's my mirror plane? That guy. And I'll say OK. And there is our top frame, basically, of our enclosure. So we let Fusion do the hard work. Okay, like I mentioned before, I like to keep things organized, and you'll see here when I jump back that we've got a lot of parts in our structure browser. So now we're going to kind of organize that and make things a little bit easier to deal with, because you'll see some of these say mirror and mirror, mirror, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to turn off my construction, and let's create a component, new component. And let's just call this top frame assembly. Okay. And then I can move all of these components. So I'm going to just shift select all of them. I'm just going to drag that into this top frame assembly. And notice my browser looks nice and clean. If I were to expand this open, we can see we've got these parts in here. Well, now maybe I want to organize even a little bit better. So check this out. At my top frame assembly, I'll right mouse click and say new component. And this is why I like to use the right mouse click, is because it's going to create a new component underneath that level right there. And I'm just going to call this, let's just call it corner plates assembly. And I'll select these 4 corner plates, drag those into my corner plates assembly, and now I'm just left with the 4 extrusion pieces, the 80-20 extrusions, and my corner plate assemblies. And what's neat about this is, for example, I could turn off those corner plates, and now we're just looking at the extrusions. It just makes things so much easier when you organize them like this to kind of keep things simple. Okay, like I showed before, we haven't created any joints, so everything is separate. Now, obviously, we're kind of screwing this thing together. We want it to be one kind of like solid thing. So I'm going to use this rigid group command. So I'm going to go ahead and say rigid group. And what are the components? I'm going to just select that whole top frame assembly. And notice it says include child components. So it's going to grab that and everything underneath it, no matter what level it's at. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And this is now a solid group. I mean, it's a rigid group. If I grab on any of it, it moves around like it's assembled together. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where we don't have to use joints and stuff like that, like rigid joints over and over and over and over again. We positioned it the way we wanted to using the align command, and then we came in and said, let's make this a rigid group. Hopefully that makes sense. I see they all gave us a thumbs up. I appreciate that. So hopefully you're learning some new tips and tricks with this. Okay, let's continue on. Okay, I'm going to activate the top level because I'm going to bring in some more components now, and I want them to come in under the top level and not underneath my top frame. So that used to be active. So I just went in here and said activate the top level component. And now I'll go back to my web page. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and save just for fun. We'll call this frame. Okay. Okay. So now I'll bring back that web page. I'll back up a little bit. We're going to bring in another profile, the 10 series profile. I'll change the stock length to a custom length. And I like to, let's just do maybe 16 in this case. We'll make it a little bit smaller. So here's a little tip. In fact, you'll notice I've been dragging this slider. Just when I was playing around, I noticed something where, you notice it says 60. If I come in here and type in 16, this still says 60. If I were to say to Autodesk, sometimes it brings that 60-inch length. So I like to click somewhere else on here, and you can see how it dragged that slider for me. And now I'm confirmed that that's 16. So just a little tip there when you're using this product. So I'll go ahead and say to Autodesk Fusion 360, because that's the coolest tool out there. And we'll bring this in. Okay. Yeah, I saw somebody said, I need that link. It's right here. It's actually not a link. It's under the Insert menu. Insert a manufacturer part. We should probably do another one just on this particular command here, because there's so much stuff out there. Electronic components, pneumatic cylinders, everything you can think of is under this manufacturer part. It's really, really cool. Okay, now I'm going to throw us a bone here. I'm actually going to rotate this and make it come in at a really weird, wrong angle, okay? Because sometimes maybe you're bringing in something from another CAD tool or whatever, and it comes in the wrong position. Something like this, for example, okay? And I just did this, again, to show the power of the align command. So I'm going to come in here and say align. And I kind of like to do the major axis first, so I'm going to go ahead and select on this face. And then I'll select maybe on this face right here, and you'll see that it straightened that up. Okay. Now it's still angled a little bit funny, but it's pointing up and down now. So maybe I'll come in and say, okay, I want to align that face with this face here. And now you can see that that's lined up. And then finally I'll do that face and maybe like that face there, and it slides it over. So even though that part that came in was in a really weird orientation, the align command straightens everything up for us. And there we go. Okay. Okay. Just for fun, I'll continue inserting some stuff. Kind of repetitive, but you kind of get the idea just how fast we can do things in here. So I'm going to go into joining plates. And I want to do a corner bracket. So I'm going to do maybe like this inside corner bracket. And what you're going to notice here, I'm going to bring this in, and there's going to be an issue. So I'll go ahead and say, in fact, let me zoom out here so you can kind of see what this looks like. It's got some alignment tabs and all that kind of stuff. It's really cool. I'll go ahead and say to Fusion. It'll bring it up. Okay. And once again, I like to get it close. So let's just go here and here, maybe over to the side just a little bit, and then I'll bring it down. Kind of like so. Okay. Now, I clicked OK too soon. I need to rotate it. So let's go ahead and select on it. I'll say move. And I'm just going to rotate that 90 degrees like so. Okay, now I've been showing the power of the align command, so let's do that again. So I'll come in here and say align. Let's just say that face with this face here. Then I could say, for example, that face with this face here. I'll have to zoom up just a little bit, make sure I can grab the right face. And then finally, I'll say that face with this face over here. And it's now in position. But if we look at it kind of from the side, you'll see that it's not in the correct location. And that's because I originally said align this outside face with the outside face here. Well, this piece is narrower. It's not as wide as our extrusions. So here is where the align command really doesn't help us yet. I'll paraphrase that. So I want to center this thing. And using the align command, we're having to go like face to face. And there's no face in the middle, and there's no face in the middle here. So I'm going to have to take an extra step. And that is going to be by creating a special joint origin. So under the Assemble menu, I'm going to say Joint Origin. And I'm going to go ahead and capture the position. Now, it says simple, but if I click this little down arrow, there's an option in here called Between Two Faces. And this is an extremely powerful option. So I'm going to say Between Two Faces, and I want to go between that face there and that face there. Okay. Now, if I leave my mouse for a second, it says place joint origin on a component. And what it's basically asking for now, let me kind of rotate around, is it's splitting that part in half. And you can kind of see that with this, oops, I was hoping to not move too much, that gray or tan plane. And so what it's asking for now is where on that plane do you want this joint origin? And I basically want it along this back corner. So I'm just going to click on that edge. And now hopefully this will make more sense. It put a joint origin in between those two faces on this edge. And you can kind of see this little coin right here. That's our, and there's a dot that kind of covers it up, unfortunately. As soon as I say OK, it'll make more sense. Let me go ahead and just say OK. And there's that joint origin. It's halfway between those two faces, and it's on that edge. So you can kind of see it's right on that edge. Okay, so that's cool. I've got a joint origin there. I'll do the exact same thing with my extrusion over here. So I'm going to say joint origin between two faces, and I want it to go between that face there, and I'll flip around and say that face there. And just like before, it's asking where do you want that joint origin to be. So if I hover over, for example, this line, you'll see that it's going to split that part in half, by putting that plane there, and then it's putting the joint origin on that line. Now, here's the catch, and it's kind of hard to see. I saw it before. The coin, or the smiley face, some people call it, was pointing straight up and down. And I want to be pretty careful. I want it to be pointing in the same direction that this one is. You can almost think of it as like a coordinate system. We're going from one coordinate system to the other. So I want the solid part to be at the top. So I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. And again, this will make more sense as soon as I say OK. And now you can see that that joint origin kind of looks like a happy face, is in the same direction as this joint origin is over here. Okay? And it's in between those two faces, and it's right on that edge. So check this out now. I can come in and say align. What do I want to go from? I want to go a component. Let's go from. And all I have to do is get near that. Let me make sure I can see it. Near that joint origin, I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. And where do I want to go to? I want to go to that joint origin. And notice what it did. It's perfectly centered. And it runs along this edge. Hopefully I can point to it. That edge right there that I can't highlight. So by creating those two joint origins, it allowed us to line those up. So you can almost think of it, you know, if I have this origin and I have an origin like this, we basically lined them up so they match up together, okay? If this were like this and we said move this one, it would rotate and try and line up like that. So that's why I spent the time to make sure that those smiley faces or those joint origins were pointing in the correct direction. Okay. Okay, let's continue on here. Now, I could bring this back in, but let's just go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to say copy and paste. So I'll go ahead and drag this over. I'll rotate it around so it's kind of pointing in the right direction. So 90 degrees. And now you'll notice that it copied that joint origin with this part. So I'll go ahead and say, okay. I do need to create one more joint origin instead of two. So I'll say between two faces. I'm going to go a little bit faster since we're running short on time. So I'll go ahead and click there and there. I'll grab that little line like so. Looks like the smiley faces are kind of pointing the same direction, so I'll say okay. Sure enough, they are. Now, you could always come in and edit this. You could rotate it around, offset it, do all that kind of stuff. So if it's pointing the wrong direction, you can always go in and edit that. Okay, let's align those together. I'll say that joint origin with that joint origin, and boom, it's in the right spot. There we go. And now all I need to do is basically what I did before. I want to, basically copy these or mirror these around. Well, guess what? I already have my mirror construction planes. So let's just do this. I'll come in here and say create a mirror. And I'll say I want those three will mirror around that mirror plane. I'll say okay. Mirror again. And I could select them, in my on the screen right here, or I can grab them from the browser. So I can grab all of those parts, mirror plane here. I'll say okay. And now we have these vertical struts. Now, again, starting to get a little kind of crazy in my browser over here. So let's create a new component. And I'll call this vertical strut assembly. And then I can just grab all of these parts like so. And I'm just going to drag that into the vertical strut assembly. And so now if I were to fold that down, you can see we've got this top frame assembly, which I can turn on or off. And I've got this vertical strut assembly, which I can turn on or off. And maybe I want to create, let's just say I want to create a subassembly in here. So new component. And let's just call this corner brackets assembly. Now, here's a neat little trick. I've shown this in a previous live stream. I've got a lot of parts in here and I want to move certain ones. And I know that the ones I want to move are these underscore 14054. So I want to select those. So I'm going to come in here and say select by name. Okay. And you can see I've already done this, but I'm going to type in underscore 14054. And I'll say find, and notice it went through and found anything that had that 14054 in it, and it selected them for me. Now all I have to do is drag and drop. Oops, let me say OK first. Drag and drop into my corner brackets assembly, and all of my little angled corner brackets went into this subassembly, because I did a search for that 14054. So it's a really cool way, if you have a lot of socket head cap screws or washers or nuts or whatever, I think this is a great tip on selecting a whole bunch of parts and organizing them into this subassembly. Okay, so now the last thing I want to do is maybe put this top assembly onto the bottom. So I'm going to need to create one more construction plane. So I'll say mid plane. Let's grab that guy there. And I can click that top face there. And you can see it's slicing through the middle there. I'll go ahead and say OK. Let's create a mirror. Components. I'm going to mirror the whole top frame assembly and the corner brackets assembly. So I expanded open my vertical strut assembly, and I selected this subassembly. So I'm mirroring that guy and that guy at the same time. What's my mirror plane? There we go. I'll say OK. And now we have something that looks like this. So obviously I might want to come in here and rename this to be bottom frame assembly. And maybe I want to put these corner brackets inside that bottom frame assembly. Actually, I lied. I put them in the wrong spot. I want those to go into the vertical strut. So you can actually see if I highlight my bottom frame assembly, it's highlighting all those angled corner pieces. I want those to be part of my vertical strut assembly. So I'm just going to come in here and drag that to vertical strut assembly. And now we can see all of those turn on and off. Okay. Okay, we are almost at the top of the hour. Let me go ahead and turn off my construction. Now, here's something kind of neat. I've got my enclosure totally designed. Let's go ahead and save it. I'll say finished. But let's say maybe it's a little bit too tall. Okay, now I don't have any parameters or anything like that that drives the size of this, right? Because we inserted particular length 80-20 extrusions. We had 24, and I think these were 16 or something like that. I can't quite remember. But check this out. I could come in here, look at it kind of from the side, and I'm going to say move. Now this time I do want to make sure I have faces selected. I'm just going to draw a box around the whole bottom of my design here. In fact, I'll go ahead and rotate a little bit. And I want to make sure, sorry, I had too many things selected. Select through, I want to make sure it's turned on. So I'll come in here and say move, faces. I'm just going to draw a box around everything. And you'll see it'll select all of those parts and faces. And now I can tell it to move. Now, sometimes I get a weird result when I do this. Like parts seem to kind of move out and away. And I think that's because of the mirrors and stuff like that that's going on. But don't worry about that right now. I'm going to come in here and say, I want to move this 4 inches up. And I'll say, OK. And it's doing all the calculation. Basically, it's moving whole parts if it can. And then it's moving the faces also. So I just changed the height of my enclosure by 4 inches. Or I shortened it, I should say, by 4 inches. Okay. I know that was a lot of information, a lot of repetitive stuff, but the key thing here was the align command. I really like it. I use it a lot, especially when I'm doing stuff like this where things are all connected together, bolted together, glued together, like picture frame, for example, whatever. Sometimes I'm helping customers out and I see hundreds of joints and I show that you can do these rigid groups and have minimal joints. Maybe get the thing together using the align command and then create a rigid joint. So the key things, I really like this insert manufacturer part, so give that a try. You do have to log in for the first time. I think you have to create, you can see I have my login up there, but it's free, doesn't cost anything to do this. And check out all of the different customers that are in here. I mean, I could scroll forever. There is a ton of them in here. So if there's a certain thing you're interested in, see if that company exists out here. If you're doing a lot of electronic design, if you're doing a lot of 80/20 or whatever, give that a try. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending. Keep an eye out for our upcoming live streams, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.